Any questions, Randy?
Mr. Chairman, they read that decision from Judge Malloy. I wasn't surprised, but very disappointed, first of all, that he didn't give any discussion about how successful we were in recovering the species. He didn't make any comments about how successful we were in managing them and how well our hunting season went. And nor did he make any comment on what I thought was the most obvious problem with his decision, and that is this. We introduced wolves in this distinct population area of the 3 states. And I visualized a pie in 3 pieces, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. We decided, all right, we have a species we're going to recover in this distinct area. And so we started by recovering it. Idaho and Montana do their part. We fully recover. We have management plans that this court sanctioned and said were good ones. But Wyoming didn't play it by the rules. But it's really difficult for me to understand how can this species be in any jeopardy in this 3-state area if in fact they're fine in Idaho and they're fine in Montana, and in Wyoming they are still under total federal control as a protected endangered species? How can there be any real jeopardy as a practical matter to the recovery of this species? Do you see any jeopardy to this species the way it now stands?
Mr. Chairman, obviously we think that the delisting in Montana and Idaho and federal management in Wyoming was sufficient to delist the Northern Rocky Mountain population in 2 of those 3 states. So we didn't concur with the rationale of the court. Might jump to go down a rabbit hole here to say, in looking for speedy solutions, based on my understanding, and it needs to be checked by your lawyer and others, but the very fastest route, according to Malloy, the Northern Rocky Mountain population, he didn't talk a lot about what Idaho said, but he did say that it has addressed recovery levels. If Wyoming were to have a management plan, that would be the fastest route to, once again, delist. So I can't make logic of the situation where it's delisted and recovered in 2 states, federally managed in a 3rd, and yet the delisting rule is rejected by the court. I'm afraid I can't make sense of that. Like I said, we thought that was a good rule.
Mr. Chairman, that partially answered my follow-up question, which was Wyoming. So Wyoming's been the problem all the way along. Maybe you could comment on how did Fish and Wildlife Service get so cross-eyed with Wyoming that they're not willing to play with you, number 1. Number 2, that clearly is the only clear, fast solution would be to get Wyoming to adopt a management plan. And what have you done or what do you plan to do to get Wyoming to come along, and what could we do to change that situation? And if that's not a possible situation, then it seems that Fish and Wildlife Service better join in with Idaho really quick and join in with the appeal, join in and support all we do under 10J and do other actions to get management back in our hands.
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
I think that the service and Idaho work together well on many issues, perhaps just not wolves. And again, respecting a sovereign, I can't explain. I can't account for why Wyoming does not want to do a state management plan, but they don't, and that's the situation, and we respect that. What have we done to try to change that? My colleague in Denver is in charge of that. I'm not trying to distance myself from it. I just don't know on a personal level, but I think we could check his travel records, and it has been exhaustive. Trying to go to the state capitol, deal with the state, and point out that the most expedient and actually also the most robust way forward is to have the states resume management because they have successful management plans and have the recovery levels. So I'm sorry that I can't explain why Wyoming doesn't want to do that, but I do so respecting that state's decisions. I hope nothing in my comment would be critical of that.
Thanks, Cameron.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer it. I've spent some time with them, and it's the way that they've been treating over the grizzly bears. It's probably 90%. They've been around the tree on this grizzly bear for 25 years, and you saw Malloy just relisted it with the excuse of global warming. So they're not very happy about jumping in bed on another issue of this magnitude when they've been treated like they have. And I'm not here to support Wyoming. I'm just telling you that's a large part of what the problem is. That they've been at this delisting a lot longer than we have on the wall. Because the bear thing has been, it goes back a long way. That's a lot of it. And so their past history, they're pretty skeptical. But back to the DPS issue, just having been involved in this issue a long time, from the time we wrote our state plan to now, we spent a lot of time when we should have been delisted wolves. I think 2002 we meet the population requirements of our state plan. And there were several ways that we tried to get around. The state made a good effort to work with you and also Interior to get around the DPS issue with Wyoming. Like take Yellowstone Park out, or include Yellowstone Park in, and we went into Western Oregon, Western Washington, and part of Utah, and tried to make I think there was 3 major attempts to change the DPS and still have huge numbers of wolves and huge numbers of acres of wolf habitat. And actually, we're excluding the worst habitat in Wyoming out of the DPS. But can you explain to me the power of how? And I've read the Endangered Species Act and I'm familiar with all of that. But I don't understand where the political power came of how in this particular wolf issue in particular, how that DPS became such a predominant portion of this decision. I've never been able to be specific, but anywhere in the law, and I know there's some examples. There's actually an example of the DPS being changed on state boundaries for a smaller, not a high-profile issue like this. So, do you just have any? What's the legal or what's the precedent-setting issue here that there's absolutely no flexibility on this DPS?
Mr. Chairman, I can only opine. I don't have expertise on this. I think this has really moved to the realm of lawyers, not because good resource management decisions and DPSs shouldn't be made by fish and wildlife professionals, but because so many federal courts have ruled on wolf issues inconsistently at times all over the nation at different points in different places. And that's one of the reasons that your colleagues in the states of Michigan and Wisconsin share and could even perhaps exceed your frustration with what's happening on wolves. So I'm not trying to dodge your question on DPS. I think I lack the insight for the past decisions that were made, but we'll find out and be accountable to you for that. It's an excellent question. I just don't feel I'm qualified to answer it. Like, as I said, we believed that this was a resolution of past criticisms from courts, approaches overturned, and yet this didn't prevail. So why previous DPSs didn't, or why we took a different path, I would be glad to be responsive, but I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow up, I appreciate that, because it seems to me like, I'm just a layman, but it seems like the key to this thing is how this DPS became so inflexible and so meaningful, even though there's ways to have fine-tuned it and to have kept the population intact and to acquire the same amount of land mass and worked our way around this with people that actually are a lot smarter than me that figured out how to do it. But every time we get to the door, this DPS thing is like a completely immovable object. And there's nowhere that I can really read that you're telling me you think it's the precedent decision that's been made in the past. So it's just a precedent that's kind of evolved through the dealing with the wolf issue with the Endangered Species Act. It really isn't stated per se in the Endangered Species Act anymore.
It's in.
To that extent, is it, Robert?
Mr. Chairman, it's in a significant portion of its range is in the Act.
Right.
We promulgate policy based on DPS, but I regret I'm not able to answer for you what is the rationale that went into some of those past decisions that were workable, not workable. And by the way, I didn't mean to say that we're totally at the whim of federal courts. It's challenging, but there's also actions taken by the service trying to read the advancements in conservation biology and at the same time those court decisions and designing DPS policy accordingly. They just haven't seemed to succeed.
Mr. Chairman.